Chapter 7, Part 5, Proof number 3, Colossians 1:15. Quote, "The firstborn of all creation." Youngest Literal Translation, Revised Standard Version, Amplified Bible, American Standard Version, etc., etc., etc. Alternate translation, quote, "Of all creation, he was the first to be produced." 21st century, New Testament. Firstborn means first to be born. When Exodus 11:15 speaks of the firstborn of Pharaoh, it is a reference to the first of Pharaoh's children. When it speaks of the firstborn of beasts, it refers to the first of their progeny. When Matthew 1:25 and Luke 2:7 speak of Jesus as Mary's firstborn son, it is a reference to him as Mary's first child. In these examples, firstborn means exactly what it appears to mean, the first to be born. Likewise, when Colossians 1:15 refers to Jesus as the firstborn of all creation, the most obvious and direct understanding of these words is that Jesus is the first of God's creation. If Jesus is a member of God's creation, he cannot, by definition, be that eternal and uncreated God who is its author. Which begs the question, is there any good reason not to take the words of Colossians 1:15 at face value? Trinitarianism insists that there is. This article shall establish that there is not. The Trinitarian argument is that the firstborn of all creation is not meant in its literal sense, first of God's creations, but in a metaphoric sense, that he is preeminent before or above creation, having, as it were, the right of the firstborn, while not being a member of creation, but rather one of the three uncreated persons in the triune Godhead. This argument is fatally flawed. But before we reveal that flaw, let's revisit Colossians 1:15. Quote, "The image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation." NKJV, RSV, YLT, AMP, NIV, etc. A visual representation. An image is a visual representation of something, not the thing itself. Consider this. Jesus is the Son of the Father, 2 John 1:3. When he said, "He that hath seen me hath seen the Father," John 14:9, he did not mean that he was the Father, but that by his words and actions, he visually represented the Father. Colossians tells us that God is invisible, just as 1 John 4:12 tells us that, quote, "No man hath seen God at any time." Jesus, on the other hand, was seen by multitudes, Matthew 4:25. Colossians 1:15 is telling us that Jesus is the visual representation of that invisible God whom no one has ever seen, the image of God, not God himself. We need to bear this distinction in mind when evaluating the Trinitarian argument for the meaning of firstborn of all creation. The first to be born. As evidence that the apparent meaning of firstborn of all creation is also its intended meaning, consider the following translations. Quote, "Of all creation, he was the first to be produced." 21st century New Testament. Quote, "Born before creation began." Phillips Modern English. Quote, "Coming into existence before all living things." Basic English Bible. Quote, "Came into being." Thayer's Greek English Lexicon. Firstborn as a metaphor. Yes, firstborn is occasionally used in the Bible as a metaphor for the position of greatest rank or importance, preeminence, rather than its literal meaning of the first one born. For example, Isaiah 14:30 speaks of the firstborn of the poor. This means the poorest of the poor, Cambridge Bible for schools and colleges, not the first of the poor to be born, and is so translated in the AMPC, ERB, EXV, ICV, NCV, NIV, etc. In Jeremiah 31:9, God calls the tribe of Ephraim, my firstborn son. Here, quote, Ephraim stands for the whole northern kingdom of the 10 tribes, of which it was the most conspicuous member, Ellicott's commentary. While this metaphoric usage of firstborn runs a distant second to its literal usage in the Bible, some have seized upon it, claiming in essence that firstborn of all creation, quote, means that Christ sustains the most exalted rank in the universe, that he is preeminent, that he is at the head of all things. Barnes notes. Many disagree. This understanding is far from universal. Many believe firstborn here does not signify preeminence over creation, but simply that Jesus was the first to be born. Quote, born first, Moffat's Bible. Quote, context shows that begotten before all worlds is the true rendering, Ellicott's commentary. Quote, born or begotten before any creature was made, Matthew Henry commentary. Quote, the true sense is born before the creation, Vincent's Word Studies. Quote, begotten of the Father before anything was made, Geneva Study Bible. Quote, born before creation began, the People's New Testament, Phillips Modern English. Quote, begotten before the creation of all things, Begel's Gnomon. Quote, begotten before all worlds, Wesley's Notes. The understanding shared among these Trinitarian Bible scholars is not that of Jesus having preeminence over creation, but of having been born prior to it. The flaw in the ointment. The fatal flaw in the Trinitarian interpretation of firstborn of all creation, the idea that it means preeminent over, but not a part of, creation, is found in its misconstruction of the meaning of firstborn. As we shall demonstrate, the word firstborn and the phrase firstborn of always designate a member of the group. In keeping with this rule, unbroken throughout the Bible and throughout all of its extra-biblical usages as well, for Jesus to be the firstborn of all creation can only mean that he is a member of creation. Thus concludes the theory. Now, for the facts. The definition of firstborn is, quote, the child in a family who is born first. Oxford English Dictionary, see also American Heritage Dictionary, Webster's Dictionary, etc. The definition of the Greek word rendered firstborn in Colossians 1:15, prototokos, prototokos, Strong's Greek Dictionary, number 4416, is, quote, firstborn, literally or figuratively. See also Vine's Expository Dictionary of New Testament Words, etc. In all of its biblical usages, the definition of firstborn and its original language counterparts remains the same, the first to be born, whether used in a literal, figurative, or metaphoric sense. The one so designated is always a member of the group. An unbroken rule. The term firstborn appears 119 times in the King James Version, 112 times in the Old Testament, and 7 times in the New Testament. In all of its biblical occurrences, the firstborn is a member of the group. Why, then, would Trinitarianism promote the idea that only in Colossians 1:15 is firstborn intended to position its subject outside of the group? The reason is obvious. It has to mean highest over, but not a part of creation, or else Jesus is a member of creation, and then it's game over for Trinitarianism. But unless Colossians 1:15 intends to violate an otherwise unbroken rule of biblical usage, firstborn here must be understood as positioning Jesus within the created order, which raises another question. Is the use of firstborn in Colossians 1:15 a valid exception to this otherwise unbroken rule? Hermeneutics to the rescue. As we have seen, a well-established principle of biblical hermeneutics is that ambiguous scripture is to be interpreted in light of clear scripture. So far as our question goes, the firstborn of all creation is ambiguous. Does it include Jesus in the created order or not? Firstborn of, a partitive phrase. There are 37 occasions in the Bible where firstborn is followed by the word of. Firstborn of is what grammarians call a partitive phrase, meaning a phrase which depicts a part of a group in relation to the rest of it. For example, firstborn of cattle, Exodus 12:29, is a part of the group of cattle. The firstborn of my children, Exodus 13:15, is a part of the group of children. The firstborn of the poor, Isaiah 14:30, is a part of the group of poor. In none of its biblical occurrence does the partitive phrase firstborn of depict its subject as being in front of or above, but not a part of, the group. In Colossians 1:15, the group is all creation. As with every other biblical occurrence of the partitive phrase firstborn of, it depicts its subject, Jesus, as a member of the group. In this case, the group consisting of the created, i.e., those brought into existence by God. The questionable substitution of over for of, quote, the firstborn over all creation, CSB, CEB, CJB, ERB, EHB, etc., 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 etc. Speaking of dirty tricks, and if we weren't, we should have been, Trinitarianism really tries to pull a fast one here. The Greek word rendered of all in firstborn of all creation is pas, P-A-S. Strong's Concise Dictionary of the Words in the Greek Testament defines it, G 3956, as, quote, the primary word all, any, every, the whole. Notice that neither the word nor the idea of over is any part of the definition of pas. While several Greek words in the KJV are translated over, epi, hyper, and above, ano, pas is never so translated, nor is it ever translated with any other words of similar meaning. And in case you think dirty trick is too strong of an indictment, consider the following. The New King James Version does not change firstborn of our sons to firstborn over our sons, Nehemiah 10:36, or firstborn of Egypt to firstborn over Egypt, Psalm 135:8, or firstborn of the poor to firstborn over the poor, Isaiah 14:30. It is only at Colossians 1:15 that firstborn of all creation is changed to firstborn over all creation. Further, in the 8 appearances of firstborn of found in the whole New Testament, it is changed to firstborn over only at Colossians 1:15. In the 30 appearances of firstborn of found in the New International Version, it is changed to firstborn over only at Colossians 1:15. In the 15 appearances of firstborn of found in today's English version, it is changed to firstborn over only at Colossians 1:15. In the contemporary English version, the phrase superior to appears only once, in the place of firstborn of at Colossians 1:15. Now, why would that be? Why would the phrases firstborn over and superior to replace the phrase firstborn of only at Colossians 1:15? Again, neither over nor above are any part of the definition of pos. The only legitimate definition is of all. The reason for mistranslating pos at Colossians 1:15 is to support the false narrative that Jesus is not a member of the created order. But again, even if over were a legitimate translation, it would not change the fact that in the Bible, the firstborn is always a member of the group. Summary. We have seen that 1. The apparent meaning of firstborn in the Bible is the first to be born. Absent a compelling reason to think otherwise, this is how the term is to be understood. 2. As the image, visual representation of the invisible God, Jesus cannot himself be that God who, quote, no man has ever seen. 3. While firstborn is occasionally used in the Bible in a metaphoric sense, many, even Trinitarian-authored, English versions and New Testament commentaries agree that the firstborn of all creation simply means the first of creation to be born or produced. 4. In the Bible, the word firstborn and the partitive phrase firstborn of, whether used in a literal, figurative, or metaphoric sense, is always intended to designate a member of the group. 5. Many Trinity-biased English New Testament versions have mistranslated the Greek pos at Colossians 1:15 in order to make the verse appear to say that Jesus is above, but not part of, creation, while correctly rendering the same Greek word as of, not over, in other verses. Conclusion. Despite a near Mephistophelian attempt on the part of Trinitarianism to mislead, misrepresent, and otherwise obfuscate the straightforward meaning of the firstborn of all creation, that meaning rings through loud and clear. It is that Jesus was the first of God's creations, and as one of God's creations, He cannot be the eternal creator, God himself.